Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney representing small and mid-sized companies in all industries. And I host this show every Tuesday evening at 5 p.m. here on Talk Radio NYC, where I have distinguished guests who talk about the issues related to employment and business, basically some of the challenges that many business owners are facing today in light of COVID-19 and the pandemic's impact. So on that note, I am very grateful to have back actually tonight someone who's been on the show before. Rick and I spoke in March. Rick Maher, a CEO and founder of Turning Point HCM, it's human capital management. Rick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me back, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to our discussion over the next hour.
Yep, same here. It's good to have you back. It's good to track the conversation that we had about roughly 7 months ago, end of March to October, and see how things have changed and how some things may have stayed the same. So, but glad to have you on, Rick. Glad to have you on. I'm going to read off just tell our listeners more about our topic tonight, so they know to stay tuned, and then I'll give you a more proper introduction, and then we can go from there. So our topic for this evening is COVID conflicts and HR solutions. And this is for employers and business owners, but it also impacts employees as well. And that the question becomes, how are you impacted by federal, state, and city mandates that are out, like the vaccine mandates, COVID-19 vaccine mandates, that is, mask mandates, testing. How do these policies impact employers? What are some of the conflicts that may develop within the workforce? And how should you, as an employer and a smart business person, address these conflicts? So I'm here tonight with my guest, as I mentioned, Rick Maher. Rick is a CEO of Turning Point HCM. He is very well versed in all things HR and employment, in my humble opinion. So with that, in fact, I'll read you some of Rick's pedigree. You can decide for yourself just how well versed he is. Rick Maher, as I mentioned, CEO, founder of Turning Point HCM, that's human capital management. He is the visionary and founder as well of the company, and it is a fractional human resource consulting firm that is focusing on solving the problems that keep business owners awake at night. And those problems usually fall into four categories, and they are compliance issues, employee challenges, policy and procedure headaches, that's a big one, strategic aligning of human capital for maximum performance. So Turning Point HCM's mission is to release the pressure valve that builds in business owners, whether legal or day-to-day HR issues pop up. And Rick's company creates a customized solution for each client's objectives, so it makes sense for the business and helps the owner put HR issues in the rearview mirror. And their clientele include the following: first or second generation family-owned businesses, as well as those companies that might have between 5 and 500 employees as a sweet spot, and roughly 1 million to 75 million in revenue. And so with that, once again, Rick, really great to have you on the show this evening.
Great. Thank you to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. That's it's truly humbling. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Great to have you on the show. So yeah, we talked about COVID-19 issues back in March, and of course, some things have changed, some things remain the same. But I guess I wanted to ask you, Rick, a question for our listeners who maybe missed the March show. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, including what prompted you to found Turning Point HCM?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, kind of the big picture is everyone has to understand their why, right? Why do they do what they do? And I think that question, or that question, that philosophical search for what you do and why you do it every day is unique to everybody. And for me, it was really a combination of two things. One, at the time when I founded the business in 2010, I had young children, and I wanted to be a part of every day of their lives and kind of control my schedule and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of the personal why. But the business why was, I saw that those, as you mentioned, the first or second generation family businesses with a handful to a couple hundred employees and $1 million to 75 million in revenue, they typically did not have professionally trained HR staff. Typically, it was, they were giving it to the office manager. Someone was handling HR, and that created big holes in those businesses, and it was creating problems, as you mentioned, the compliance, employee issues, policies and procedures, and strategic stuff that was damaging businesses. So I saw an opportunity to use a fractional model to bring what big companies have from an HR perspective down to those, first or second generation family businesses with a couple hundred, handful to a couple hundred employees. And that was the beginning of it. So it was a combination of those two things, a hole in the marketplace and really my desire to live, outside of work, how I wanted to do it exactly.
Yeah, it had that freedom. It's interesting, Rick, because I've interviewed a lot of people over the last 13 months or so roughly with the show. And often when I ask people that, if I ask people that question of, how did you start? What prompted you to found your company? Usually there's often a personal component too. Some people say I saw a great sort of need in the market, as I heard you describe, with those smaller companies, for example, that didn't have like the HR, internal department, and they needed someone to go to. And I also, but there's usually a personal part too. So like, good to hear your personal why had to do with your family and children. It's I could relate in terms of having a young son who just turned 2 in August and 2 years old. And when COVID hit, he was like 6 months, 7 months old, thereabouts, 7 months old. And I remember that it was kind of at that time when just having that contrast, like being home and working from home, it was a real there's more time with my wife and son. So it's interesting to see that that was a factor, and I think that combined with the market bearing what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, kind of this might be a little off topic for tonight, but maybe it is not off topic. People have gotten used to over these past 18 months being remote. And I think as businesses are, to our topic, trying to open, trying to deal with how do we come back to work? How do we deal with lots of different things, not
Mhm.
just the topic of COVID and human capital management, but really employees saying or determining their own why, and
Mhm.
that why may have changed, or it might have become more to the forefront than it was 3 or 4 years ago when they took that job.
Mhm.
So understanding that why and how it relates to human capital management really could be a big part of the strategy going forward in dealing with COVID and the mandates and all the things that we're gonna jump into over the next few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a really good point, Rick. Understanding the why of your employees and of yourself, and also like knowing how that may have changed. I think a lot of people tend to ask questions when they've gone through a rough ordeal or a life-changing situation. And who among us can't say that the COVID-19 pandemic from the start until now has been a life-changing or altering event? So I think it's a really good point. And I think you're right about how like, this can fit nicely into our topic tonight. So why don't I get into, or rather start with a quick question for you. I'm wondering, so what have been, Rick, some of the biggest HR related challenges to business in the last couple months, particularly in light of vaccination mandates, mask mandates becoming such hotly debated topics?
Yeah, I think there's been a real shift, over the summer months where, the vaccine became very available, right? So there was this sense from a human capital perspective that
Mhm.
we were nearing the end somehow, right? And businesses started to gear up for what that meant,
Mhm.
right? And I think that what that meant to a lot of business owners was we were going back to March 15th, 2020. We'll use the 15th as the line of demarcation to make it easy
Right.
for this conversation.
Mhm.
And gearing up their businesses and their employees and their expectations for
Mhm.
that, right? And I think that as the mandate became part of what's going on, the Delta variant became part of what's going on, the colder weather is now part of the conversation. I think that those plans have been have been altered in many cases
Mhm.
from not only the leaders of a business saying this is what we're going to do, but from the human capital saying I'm not sure that's what I want to do. Maybe my why has changed. And I think that as we've gone through this whole thing back to March 16th, let's call it, to 2020,
Yes.
that COVID has been the umbrella of all of the things that we talk about and have to deal with every day. But
Mhm.
underneath that umbrella, we've had some different silos of things that we've had to deal with. So in the very beginning, it was, can we get testing? What does this thing mean? What is it going to be? Then I think, last year there was a very much COVID was driving and in businesses, the social change came to the forefront, social unrest and all those things came to the forefront. And that was something that business leaders had to deal with. But even at that point, businesses were not back in the office. So there was this
Mhm.
separation of human capital management, of human capital, right? Everyone was kind of home. But in these past couple of months, as businesses started to test the waters and come back,
Mhm.
and the mandates now became a part of it, it it almost accelerated
Mhm.
the potential challenges that business owners and people, employees are facing, right? So it went from, hey, we're all going to come back to the office and it's going to be March 15th, 2020 again, to, hey, we're all coming back to the office and we have a situation where we have the Hatfields and the McCoys, right?
Mhm.
And kind of the property line divider is vaccines and mandates and how we all feel about that,
Yeah.
right? And as a business leader, we have to determine, how do we navigate this to keep the team functioning together,
Mhm.
to keep the employees um, focused on what their job is. And really, I think the biggest challenge that business leaders have is the strategies and goals of the business, the
Mhm.
strategies and goals of each department, and the strategies and goals of each individual employee and their job function have to be aligned to
Mhm.
have a great human capital management strategy.
Mhm.
And right now, you know, like a chiropractor or a game of Jenga,
Mhm.
keeping that alignment has
Mhm.
been the challenge for many business owners. It's been the challenge for many employees. And then I think that hasn't completely shaken out yet as to what that looks like to get back to just focusing on business and the goals of the company, the goals of the department, and the goals of each employee or job.
Yeah. I think you've got a lot of good nuggets there. You've really gotten into, and I would love to. I would actually want to take some of those like nuggets and talk more about them, and also give some observations, like from my point of view of what you're saying. I think it's really solid points there. I'm going to save it for after the commercial break, though, since we're at a commercial break right now, if you can believe it. But time flies when you're having fun, right?
There
So,
you go.
folks, you're listening to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. Stay tuned because we'll come back shortly. We're going to talk about what Rick just mentioned, talk about some of those strategies and goals, and talk about how business has changed post March 15th, so the 2020. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
You're listening listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauber, here tonight with my guest. Our guest tonight is Rick Maher, CEO, founder, and visionary for Turning Point HCM. And we're talking about COVID conflicts, essentially, COVID-19 related issues, and human capital solutions with Rick. And I have to say, Rick, your last answer to my question about some of the HR challenges had some really good points. I wanted to elaborate on some of them that you mentioned, if I may. I think you raised a really good point, sort of this, I'll call it BC, before COVID, the new BC, and I think maybe after COVID, AC. But, I think like a lot of companies in the beginning maybe hope that we can sort of go back to where we were, as if we had hit pause, like on a VHS tape or a movie. We hit the pause button and we can't wait to go back and then pick up where we left off. And I think one thing we have seen is that things change and they evolve, and it's hard. You really don't go back to the old. You sort of start anew. And I think it like calls into question like people's sort of discomfort with change, right? And I think that's true in human nature. I think it comes out in the workplace. So I think that was an interesting point that I got from what you said. And then a second point that you raised, just the idea of like what human capital point of view with employees viewpoints changing, or with say conflicts emerging, the Hatfields and McCoys, right? People on very polarized sides of issues around vaccines and mandates, and not what's a company to do, what kind of strategy does the business take when dealing with say workplace conflicts. So maybe I can give you like an example of maybe say a workplace conflict, and maybe you can tell me some thoughts. So suppose, let's say you have an HR company department, or let's say even a manager tasked with creating or implementing a vaccine policy, maybe vaccine mandates or testing. What do you do as a company, and say if the senior level management, right, say clash with the company's ideals, maybe a senior partner, for example, or junior partner who refuses to get the vaccine and it's not in line with the company? How would you handle that for a client, let's say?
Yeah, I think that's a great example of and we actually are dealing with this every day, and in particular, a very large law firm where some senior partners, the top of the top, refuse the vaccine. So really, it becomes a function of dealing with it as best as possible, because you're just not going to fire them. They have all the clients, and they probably have their names on the door in many instances. So following the protocols and the mandates are very important. So that might be testing, and it might be tracking every day what's going on in the business. But I think it goes back to, the business leaders have to understand their why, right? So why are they in business or in the position that they are in? Is it to make money? Is it to grow the business? What is it? Or is it to purely express their political views? And I would think a lot of business leaders have to look at their why, and maybe say, if their why is to be in business to create an organization that lives beyond me, that's scalable, that's profitable, that whatever their why is, I think they may have to sometimes separate what their personal views are with their why, right? So if they're going to have an outbreak in their office because people are not vaccinated or following mandates, then they have to understand that that's going to, hurt their why, right? Which is to be in business. So I think they have to deal with that. But I think, that's an extreme example. But I think, the middle management, or the lower, the rank and file employee who are not following it, create a different challenge, right? And still, the testing and policies and procedures have to be in place, but imagine the accounting department in a mid-sized firm, and there's 10 people and 2 are not vaccinated. And now other employees start treating them differently. start ostracizing them. I think that businesses at all levels have to understand what the mandate is, have a plan for COVID and testing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they have to get back to the basics of training, right? And a lot of times training has been, let's say in New York City, for purposes of sexual harassment, a mandated sexual harassment training. But
Right.
hostile work environment is part of a harassment training. And hostile work environment can encompass a lot of things. So we want to make sure that every business is doing those sorts of things, right? Diversity, equality, and inclusion training traditionally might have been thought of for other reasons. But if you think about it, it applies for these reasons as well. And then kind of finally along those training lines, let's say you do terminate someone because they're not vaccinating or not following the mandate. And now the hiring manager is interviewing someone. Are they asking questions and making decisions that are putting the business at risk because they're not properly trained on how to interview properly? So I think a lot of these things from a human capital management perspective, training should become even more important to a business to help it achieve its goals alongside the compliance and all those other things and understanding their why. But on the ground, rank and file employees, first line supervisors and managers, those kinds of trainings have to be implemented. Otherwise, it's going to take that spine or that game of Jenga, and it's gonna knock the human capital management out of alignment, which is going to be the opposite of what a business is trying to have happen to achieve its goals.
Yeah, Rick, I hear you rightfully, right? I mean, it's what you do, approaching like this question from an HR, human capital perspective. I think it's very important to make the distinction between, say, how somebody might address like this very topic, say, strictly from an employment law perspective of, okay, what do you have to do to comply with the law to not get a penalty or a fine? What do you have to do to minimize the risk of a lawsuit? That's, of course, like one part of the equation. That's what I do for companies a lot. These same factors about like trainings. I talk to companies about what the law requires, like, and how you might benefit in terms of, like, say, reducing your liability. But what I hear you saying is that, so even if liability like weren't part of the equation, right? Let's say there were no law requiring trainings and about hostile work environment, or let's say it wasn't required to do this from a legal perspective. I hear you saying that if you want to say your employees, right, to be able to do their functions, to function as if like they're a well-oiled machine, not sort of out of alignment with all these internal conflicts and decreasing morale. If you want them to be productive and to further your why, to make money, right, grow the business, like have clients, customers come back, then you need to take steps such as training, such as open communication, such as like just knowing that you want to avoid internal conflict, or not avoid it, but just deal with it. So I think it's an important distinction. I hear you saying, right, let's look at these factors in terms of human capital and how do we keep employees happy? How do we keep them around, not leaving? And is that a fair statement?
And I think, if you look at this in kind of three ways, there's employment law and compliance, right? Clearly you're bailiwick, you're the doctor, you're in charge, then in the middle is taking your guidance and bringing it to the employer and trying to get them to follow that guidance on a day-to-day basis so that they don't have these problems. And then the third side of it is where I'm focusing on this issue with our clients now is to take the temperature down for everybody. Focus on the why of the business.
Right.
And then make decisions based on that rather than the hypercharged things that are going on. And to your point, forget that it's a mandate, forget that there's these things. What is best for your business to further your why? And if you go back to when you so eloquently introduced me, the 4 problems that we solve for clients, compliance. So there's 4 things: compliance, employee issues, policies and procedures, and then the strategic stuff. So if you just take those words and apply them to the human capital management and the why, right? It becomes easier to say, okay, we want to be in compliance. We don't want to have employee issues. we want to have proper policies and procedures for consistency in how we deal with our employees to avoid problems so they know what to expect, keeping them in alignment.
Yeah.
And then the fourth is the strategic side, which is how do we get the right people on our team so that, again, we're all aligned culturally, culture beats strategy every time, right? Culturally aligned so that we can then implement a great strategy and move forward. So I think you're right. There's the HR compliance stuff where you and I kind of are adjacent or tangential, if you will. And then there's the HR human capital, which is all about how do we, in an Orwellian 1984 way, if we think of people as human capital machinery, what would you do to keep your machines running as efficiently as possible every day, all the time, and keeping and furthering the goals of the company?
Yeah, so I hear you saying it's like, you've got this sort of day-to-day, right, implementing the plan. I mean, so if you're a football team and you draw the X's and O's, the plan could be like the greater plan could be you want to, score as many touchdowns and block as many touchdowns as possible and, win the game. But like, how do you get there? And that's maybe where the coach comes on with the board, the X's and O's and all the different, like, okay, you run here, you go over there, you fall back. I kind of see that maybe as a metaphor, even though I'm admittedly not a huge sports guy per se, but it's just like, kind of hearing that, you kind of help companies with, I understand, the implementing the sort of nuts and bolts of how to function like a well-oiled machine. I think that's important.
Yeah, exactly. And those things are, to use a team analogy, the first baseman and the second baseman may not hang out outside the game, but on the field, they know their role. They know that if they do their role properly, it furthers the goal of the team. And if their strategy is strong, that's great. But if the culture is even better, where they understand how to work together, that culture, if you took culture versus strategy as a separate entity, culture wins every time, in my opinion, in a business too. But if you take great strategy and now you have great culture, now you're, I hate to say it, you're the Boston Red Sox. So I think that, business leaders have to understand what their why is. And then the human capital has to be in complete alignment. But I think for purposes of COVID, taking the temperature down, focusing on the getting everyone in alignment and focused on the why can help make decisions separate from the what's going on in the news and all those sorts of things.
I think it's like a really important point, Rick, as you mentioned, bring it back to COVID, because these are very general or Jacob's broad points that could be arguably applied. If you and I were having this conversation, like say 3 years ago, about HR and employment and employment law strategy, culture beating strategy every time, and if you can combine those two, a good culture in the workplace and a good strategy, wow, you're really off. I think some huge promise. I think what you raised some really good points about how bringing the temperature down is so important, and I want to hear after the commercial break more from you about how you and Turning Point HCM help to bring that temperature down, and how could some of our listeners at home, right, who have their own business, how can they bring down that temperature and the heat, the conflict in the workplace during such divided times? So we're going to take a quick commercial break. I'm here tonight on Employment Law Today. My guest is Rick Maher, CEO, founder of Turning Point HCM. Stick around. We'll be right back.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on TalkRadio.NYC every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a cannabis enthusiast? a cannabis professional, or interested in entering the cannabis space. I'm Johnny Tsunami, and this is Planet Baco Lolo, a less taboo view. On our show, we will discuss the cannabis world through the perspective of various cannabis professionals. Tune in every Thursday evening, Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m., Talk Radio NYC, Planet Baco Lolo, a less taboo view.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.NYC. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back, folks, to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law and business law attorney. I'm here tonight with my guest, Rick Maher, CEO and founder of Turning Point HCM. Once again, that's like Turning Point Human Capital Management. And we're talking about COVID conflicts, COVID-19 issues, and HR solutions. So we left off talking about some of those conflicts and how important it is for companies, I think, to kind of refocus their company and their employees on the bigger picture, the why, and how that I know that I've seen clients of mine where that can get very derailed when a very hot topic conflict, is running rampant in their company. And these days, with so much polarization around like these very sensitive topics, of mask mandates and COVID-19 vaccinations, and it can be a very turning down that heat could be a challenge. So I guess my question for you, Rick, is what are some specific, some of the conflicts that you've seen the most in the last few months in the workplace around COVID? What are the specific conflicts, and what are some ways that you mentioned training? What are the ways does Turning Point HCM deal with those conflicts, help your clients deal with those conflicts? I think you're muted.
Sorry. There we go. Yeah. So sorry about that. So it's a great question. So I think there's been two general in the past, let's say 3 months, two types of general questions or problems that have arose. The first one was we touched on it earlier. We have people that won't get the vaccine for whatever reason, right? How do we deal with that? Now, the one that we're getting now is there's two more. We have some people vaccinated, some non-vaccinated, Hatfields and McCoys. And now so that's been a problem. And then the third general problem has been we have either we have vaxxed or unvaxxed or any combination of people who are now showing up positive. What do we do? Right. So I think that those are the general problems that business owners are facing. And I think the overall way that really good companies are solving it is they're taking consistent policy and making it the arbiter of goodwill rather than letting emotion or two people talking make it seem unfair. You like Joe better than you like Sally, and so on and so forth. So what do I mean by that? So very specifically, what companies are doing now is they're proactively writing a COVID business policy, a COVID response plan, right? And it's customized to each business, and it lays out scenarios of what are we going to do if and when and why. And now what that policy typically can't cover every single contingency problem. But what it does is it gets the business leaders and the human capital leaders and the human capital, the people, starting to think through things so that they have a mechanism for how they're going to respond. And it creates consistency for everyone involved. So we can go, oh, let's go to the COVID plan. Let's see what we wrote a month ago. So that's a great way to kind of apply consistency and take the temperature and the emotion down, because the plan kind of becomes, let's call it the bad person or the bad actor in the room if something bad has to happen. But more importantly, it gives a central place where everyone's on this is around the table working together rather than on two different sides yelling at each other. The second thing along those same lines is having a great policy as regard to daily attestation that's HIPAA compliant, that's very non-judgmental. It's not someone sitting at the front desk in the old days shooting taking your temperature, like pointing a gun at your head, but using technology to have people attest every day, track that, do for those that are unvaccinated, and we're having a lot that are taking to even their regular or their vaccinated people, and they're doing either some level of PCR testing that flows into that attestation or rapid testing.
Yeah.
So they're not separating employees. You're vaccinated, you're going to test, or not test. You're vaccinated, unvaccinated, you're going to test. They're applying it consistently across the company.
Yeah.
And then, the third thing that they're doing, and it kind of goes back to the COVID policy, is there have been so many federal and state updates with regard to COVID that should be updated in the employee handbook, that we're advising every employer to have someone review your handbook and have it updated. But more importantly, put the handbook on everyone's desk, right? And have employees, when there's a problem, and managers say, let's see what the employee handbook says. So again, that's a way to use a consistent policy to take down the temperature. It's not me yelling at Eric. It's not Eric yelling at me. Everyone knows the way the mechanisms with which we're going to make decisions, the consistency of how we're going to frame the solutions to these problems. And that helps to take the temperature down and align people back to that alignment of company goals, division goals, and employee goals.
Yeah.
In a way that's lack of a better term, judgmental.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's a good point, Rick, that like when you have, say, a policy that governs or controls in a situation where two parties are in opposite with one another, it's great in that, if there's a person that seems, even if they're not, but if they're perceived to be an arbitrary sort of random, decision maker saying, well, I'm siding with, Bob over Sally. And then Sally believes maybe that, the manager doesn't like her, or maybe the manager she believes is misogynistic, or and it can go either way, right? Bob could believe that that maybe siding with Sally is because the manager doesn't like Bob. But if you have a policy that you've already established and the employees are aware of it and they've agreed to it, you have that consistency, that comprehensive, uniform, sort of rule to go to. Let's go to see what the rules say. Reminds me of, let's say, if two people are, involved in disagreement over, say, game night, right? Like a Trivial Pursuit or something, and there's some kind of a clash. Well, what are the rules of the game say? The rules say that if you move this, piece here, you have to go back, and you really can't get mad at the other person too much because it's kind of following the rules. I know it's not a perfect situation. People can be angry with the rules, but I think it's like a good point. You mentioned something about having a COVID-19 policy or plan with some uniforming rules in it. I think that's also really excellent, because all these issues that just come up, we can't foresee every single one, but we can know that some might be, out there. I'm wondering, when you create a COVID-19 policy or plan, do you have your clients get the employees on board? In other words, is it a joint plan created by both employers and employee representatives, or is it more like management creates it and then shares it with the employees?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but unlike the handbook, there is more employee input because there are more situations going on than, from an HR perspective, for however many years, everyone knew what the rules of the road were, right? We do this and this happens. And this is completely unknown territory.
Yeah.
And literally the rules are changing of the COVID game are changing every day, and it's COVID's fault. So I'm not blaming anyone else, but we're
Sure.
reacting almost daily to some new bit of information. So what we're seeing is some committee work. So clearly, this is a directive by senior leadership to, in many cases, HR. But HR is bringing in some of the employees, or to get input. And I would say that in the clients that we've done this for, the really good ones, they understand their why, right? That's first and foremost.
Mhm.
But second off, what they understand is that the plan may go out the window
Yeah.
on some specific thing, but the process of planning
Mm.
is incalculable how valuable it is,
Yeah.
right? Because now you have stakeholders who are from all sides,
Yep.
but more importantly, everyone understands and can see from the inside that there was a real true good faith effort
Mm.
in having a plan
Yeah.
and building out a plan. And I think that that gives leeway for
Mhm.
everyone to make decisions, or to diagnose the decision
Yeah.
to, of what needs to happen in this literally daily changing world
Right.
that COVID is throwing at us as human capital, as human capital management leaders, and as senior business leaders.
Yep. I think absolutely right, Rick. I think it's really spot on there. I mean, it's like these things are always changing, and it's like the rules keep changing based on the variants, and there's a science involved, the numbers of how people are getting sick. But like what I hear you saying too is the importance of having clarity and communication amongst the employers and the employees, and I think it's like also important to know that there's a policy in place that is somewhat flexible, as you mentioned. If things change, it needs to have some like leeway there. But just I think what I found over the years of doing practicing employment law is that, direct like policies, like direct guidance, and open communication, very often it can really de-escalate conflict, can really make for a happier workplace. I think too often companies assume that if they keep things just kind of like vague and just not too sort of buttoned up, right? Like, we don't need an employee handbook. We'll just talk things out, and they think that'll actually make for a better workplace. It actually often makes a much worse workplace because people have misconceptions about like what the rules are. What's the playing field. So I think it's all to your point of like, having a COVID-19 policy just being so important. And updating handbooks. So that's something you're seeing a lot of, updating employee handbooks. I've seen.
Yeah, we're updating a ton of handbooks right now. We're rewriting a bunch. I think it's a good thing that it's many people had their handbook written 6 years ago. It's somewhere in their desk collecting dust, and
Right.
it's bringing them back. And I think from an employee perspective, they want to understand the rules from the road. They want to understand what they're being judged on, and then they want to do their job and have and move forward. So I think we're seeing a lot of it, and it's a really good thing to think about doing.
Excellent point, Rick. Really something to think about. Well, think about that on the commercial break as well. We're taking another break just for a moment. Folks, I'm Eric Sauber, host of Employment Law Today, a weekly show here on Talk Radio NYC with my guest, Rick Maher, founder of Turning Point HCM. Stick around for more talk on COVID, conflict, and HR solutions, and we will be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.NYC, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.NYC.
Do you feel uninformed about menopause and how it impacts on your life? Hi, I'm Pat Duckworth, women's health strategist and host of the Hot Women Rock radio show, empowering women leaders at menopause. Join me every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. UK time on TalkRadio.NYC for interviews with inspirational women who will share their top tips to rock your world.
Have you ever thought of reinventing yourself? Are you looking to create a new life's journey? Hi, I'm Kevin Barbaro, host of Coffee Talk XL every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.NYC. Tune in live to hear me and my guests from a variety of different backgrounds. As a former college coach and a current full-time actor and owner of multiple companies, my show is as eclectic as my life. That's Coffee Talk XL every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. on TalkRadio.NYC.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I am your host, Eric Sauver, here tonight discussing human capital management solutions to COVID with our guest, Rick Maher, founder and CEO of Turning Point HCM. Rick is in the business of helping employers with their employee challenges, with compliance, policies and procedures. And Rick, again, it's really great to have you on the show tonight covering such good topics. Yep.
Mute myself. I'm sorry, I'm getting bad at unmuting myself coming back from the breaks. So it's been terrific being here. I mean, this is the topic of the day, and it's not only affecting, people here in New York, but it's the world. It's affecting everything, and the linchpin of all of this are businesses have to succeed in order for us globally to get where we want to be. Then obviously underneath that at a more granular level, each of our businesses have to succeed and our teams have to perform. And we have tremendous challenges, at the macro and micro level, that COVID is throwing this curveball at us, and how we as leaders deal with it, how we as employees overcome it is going to be a big deal. And those that survive and those that figure that out, philosophically, when in March 15th or March 16th, Mark Cuban, the billionaire investor and Shark Tank and Dallas Mavericks owner, started talking a lot about, this is when we were in the real depths of those first few months, and it was kind of a really depressing time, if you will. He was talking about, the next set of great companies are going to come out of this, right? And we don't know who they are yet. And I think that, if you look back at 2008 and 2009, companies like, Amazon and Google, although they were in existence, they became, in the last, out of 2008, 2009, 10 timeframe, something that not are just great companies, but affect almost every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, very true, I think. And funny you mentioned Amazon, because during the pandemic, as many of us, couldn't go out in person to get certain things, we suddenly were buying clothes online, having things delivered through Amazon. So I think it's really a good point. It makes me think about the future. What you're saying just now made me think about the future. And so I guess I'm wondering, in terms of planning, what do you see over the next few months from a human capital perspective for employers and employees as they deal with COVID?
We see that some great companies, what they're starting to do is as funny as this may sound, embrace COVID. And see it as a strategic advantage. And again, it goes back to that why, right? Why am I in business? To take advantage of, and I don't mean that in a negative way, to take advantage of a situation, to build a business that's sustainable, profitable, all those kinds of things, one day sellable, that sort of thing. And what those businesses are doing is they're recognizing that COVID is here for the foreseeable future, right? Like it, hate it, whatever it is, it is. And how do we wrangle that to the ground in a way that's consistent with our why, and helps our employees achieve what they need to achieve? So things like we talked in the last segment, companies that are really succeeding are going after training hard.
Yeah.
They see training as a key to getting their employees to understand how we're all going to work together going forward.
Mhm.
They're going after policy and procedure in a way that they never have. So the COVID-19 policy and getting their teams around, what a great exercise. Let's build this policy together. Let's build this for our business so that we're all in this thing together. And the curveballs that are on the way that we just can't see yet, we have a function and a mechanism to deal with those. They're understanding that the Hatfields and McCoys
Mhm.
they have to find a way to get them on the same page again, doing things like daily attestations and, you know, PCR tests and rapid tests and all that kind of stuff in a HIPAA compliant way. And then the fourth thing that they're really recognizing, again, this is really things we talked a little bit, is that employee handbook and those job descriptions. Things have definitely changed in the business. Well, from forget the compliance perspective, we know that that if your handbook's more than 2 days older, it's out of bit.
It's like an iPhone too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there you go. It's an iPhone too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It might even be a brick.
Right.
So I think those kinds of things are absolutely critical. And to Mark Cuban's point, the great businesses that we're going to be talking about for the next 20 years are embracing those sorts of things today, not because they have to, but because they understand that if they do, it's going to give them a tremendous competitive advantage over those businesses that are still waiting for March 15th to return.
Excellent.
And that's where I think a lot of businesses are focused. So it's the structural human capital management part of it and managing COVID really touches the four things that you introduced me on, dealing with compliance issues. So it's going to affect compliance in a positive way.
Yeah.
It's going to affect employee issues. I mean, there are too many to mention in a positive way. It's going to the policies and procedures, the handbooks, the job descriptions, the performance management, again, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And then most importantly, the strategic, aligning your human capital management to perform the job, because some businesses are going to start to fall by the wayside because they're not embracing this.
Right.
And it's giving a competitive advantage. So yes, we have to do it. Yes, it's scientific. Yes, it's a mandate and all those things. And that's for another conversation. This is about how do you use human capital management?
Yeah.
How do you use your policies and procedures to further your why?
And I see a very positive cycle there, Rick, right? If a company, like say, is kicking and screaming and fighting against the reality, that if they're not embracing COVID in that sense, like they want to go back in time to March 15th, then they might be less inclined to say, to really buckle down, like with training around interviewing, buckle down like with, new employee handbooks and airborne infectious like disease policies in the workplace. But I think that to your point, if a company can embrace COVID and say, okay, right, this is the reality. We have a why, a mission, a goal to sell services, like give product, make money, et cetera. How can we then implement these trainings? I think then that start to see positive results, and that'll reinforce the why and the why their goal motivation works, and they'll keep circling back to re-implement these trainings. But I think you raised some like really good points. I think you also sort of take us out on a nice optimistic note, that like this whole COVID thing, can be as horrible as it is. We're not minimizing like, the horrible impact on people and their lives like the COVID's created. But, if a company can accept it and move forward, then they can start to have different methods and mechanisms. And, we're actually, speaking of moving forward, about 3 minutes shy of our end time. Mine goes fast, but what I'll do is I want to give you 2 minutes just to kind of like, tell us a bit more about your company and anything you have maybe going on in the next, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think as you see this person above my head, what we've tried to do for business owners across the country, and we've worked with over 1,300 businesses in 65 different industries in 48 contiguous United States. We're not in Alaska or Hawaii yet, but someone's got to invite me to get there. And and really what we're focused on is bringing solutions and a place for them to be. So this young lady over my shoulder here, her name is Liv, and we created a program where 24/7, very inexpensive, high impact research on all these questions. You can ask Liv at any time, and that is available at our website, turningpointhcm.com, at any time. It's a terrific service. Our goal is, you're right, is to be optimistic. You can't be a business leader and not be optimistic.
Yeah.
You take too many trips to, if you're not an optimistic, you go away fast. So sometimes it takes a few minutes to wrangle down what needs to be done. But as a business leader, there are resources. As a business leader, there are people who can help you align your biggest expense, which is your human capital expense, your
Yeah.
people. And it's I'll leave you with this last thing. Human capital is the most amazing tool in your arsenal because it has the ability to screw up everything that you've built. But unlike any other capital, computers, machinery in your business, human capital is the only capital equipment that has the ability to fix the problems and send your business going up in the right direction again. So it's really a unique way to look at it, and it's an optimistic way, and that's what I think everyone needs to be.
Rick, thank you so much for that optimistic note to end on. I mean, you really covered, as I know you often do, the general, the comprehensive themes, and then the specifics of the how to implement things that will help businesses with the human capital. So folks, I want to thank Rick Maher from Turning Point HCM for being on the show tonight. If you like what you heard, tune in Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.NYC. Stick around, we have more great shows coming up on the station. So Rick, once again, thank you so much for being on the show. Always a pleasure and really helpful, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you. Thank you again, Eric.
My pleasure.